On a brisk autumn morning, Emily Harper crouched on her front lawn, tying her shoelaces, completely unaware that two police officers were quickly approaching. Their hands hovered near their weapons, tension crackling in the air. "Ma'am, step back and keep your hands visible," one of them ordered sharply. Emily, dressed in faded joggers and a hoodie, looked up, more confused than alarmed. Her legally holstered firearm rested securely at her side. The officers eyed her like she was seconds from committing a robbery. One nervously keyed his radio. "Female suspect armed. Potential threat. Caller reports neighborhood disturbance." Then he spotted the gleam of a badge clipped to her waistband. His posture changed instantly. The second officer's expression turned pale. "You're Chief Harper?" he asked, stumbling over his words and stepping backward like he'd seen a ghost. Across the street, Margaret Voss, president of the local HOA, clutched her barking terrier and her phone, looking far too pleased with herself. She had no idea that her emergency call had targeted the newly appointed police chief, and that her lie was about to cost her everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the latest volley in a long, quiet battle. For months, Margaret had tried to control the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. Re-elected in a shady, poorly attended vote, conveniently following a neighborhood potluck, she wielded her authority like a tyrant. $25 fines for untrimmed lawns, $50 for kids drawing on sidewalks, $100 for Christmas lights left up past January. Her newest mission? Outlawing visible firearms. She claimed they disturbed the peace, even though the state allowed open carry and residents felt safer after last year's string of break-ins. To her, Emily's sidearm wasn't protection. It was a challenge. 2 days earlier, Margaret had marched right into Emily's yard, catching her mid-gardening with pruning shears in hand. "You'll be fined $500 a day for having that weapon visible," she snapped. Emily, unbothered, explained she was off duty, completely within her rights, and that the HOA had no authority over her legally carried firearm. Margaret scoffed. "You're supposed to set an example, not look like you're ready for a shootout." Emily smiled, calm and collected. "I am setting an example, one that respects the law, not your personal preferences." Margaret left in a huff, vowing, "I'll deal with this." And she did, by dialing 911 the next time Emily stepped outside. Once the officers realized who they were confronting, they quickly began apologizing. "We just got a report from dispatch. Armed female, urgent call from the HOA president," one muttered. Emily simply nodded. "You followed protocol. Now I'll do the same." Margaret, still across the street and oblivious to the shift in tone, watched smugly as her planned humiliation fell apart. Emily walked over, her voice calm but firm. "You reported a threat you couldn't verify," she said. "That's a criminal offense." Margaret blinked. "I didn't know it was you. You weren't in uniform." "I thought." Emily's gaze was steady. "That's exactly why you don't make accusations without proof. You put people at risk, including yourself. You'll be held accountable." Later that evening, 6 neighbors came to Emily's door, bringing brownies, soda, and quiet words of support. "We saw everything," one of them said. "She's out of control. Let us know how we can help." Emily had never sought attention, even after becoming chief, but that night, she felt the neighborhood's trust wrap around her like armor. Still, Margaret didn't back down. The next day, she distributed a newsletter accusing Emily of flashing a weapon and claiming she no longer felt safe on her own street. She implied abuse of authority and called Emily's presence a source of division. Emily didn't respond publicly. Instead, she sent the 911 call log, bodycam footage, and a formal harassment complaint to the city attorney. The city council, stunned by what they saw, held a private meeting. There, Emily exposed months of Margaret's underhanded tactics. Anonymous letters urging neighbors to isolate troublemakers, HOA mailings filled with fabricated rules, and enforcement threats with no legal basis. One council member whispered, "I thought HOAs were supposed to be about lawn care, not autocracy." Still unaware of how close her downfall was, Margaret called an emergency HOA meeting and pushed for a formal weapons ban, citing her 911 experience as justification. But the room had turned against her. Her influence was crumbling. And this time, No potluck or newsletter would save her. Tom, a reserved retiree, rose to his feet. You misled us about the police chief. You put this entire community at risk, and frankly, you're lucky we're not voting you out right now. Margaret's vice president leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and her expression stiffened. The room was slipping from her grip. Still, Margaret pressed on, reaching out to a local journalist in hopes of discrediting Emily. What she didn't know was that the reporter's own son had once been saved by Emily during a fire. The move backfired spectacularly. Emily, however, remained unshaken. Her steady demeanor outmatched Margaret's desperation. At the next public safety meeting, Emily calmly presented evidence. The 911 call, community newsletter clippings, and documentation of her rights as both a citizen and a trained officer. When Margaret's voice rang out from the recording, frantic and accusing, the room fell silent. The mayor, visibly stunned, called for an audit of the entire HOA. The city attorney launched an investigation into Margaret's policies, which led to a revelation from the HOA's vice president, David Chin. He admitted to Emily that Margaret had overridden board votes for years, issuing penalties without consent. He submitted a sworn declaration detailing her manipulation of the HOA, essentially running it as her personal fiefdom. Margaret's next tactic was a glossy newsletter, painting herself as the innocent, targeted by Emily's supposed connection to law enforcement. She mailed it to every resident, and even taped copies to doors. But one furious neighbor forwarded the pamphlet to the mayor, adding, "This is where our dues are going?" Public anger grew quickly. At the following HOA meeting, longtime residents like Mrs. Larson, who'd lived on the block for 35 years, spoke up. She credited Emily with helping her grandson and stopping a drunk driver. Another neighbor waved the newsletter, shouting, "You lied to the cops and slandered her. That's not protection, it's recklessness." Margaret tried to frame the pushback as betrayal, but when the board proposed a vote of no confidence, she offered only a nervous laugh. The results were lopsided: 28 for her removal, 2 in support, 1 abstention. Red-faced, she stormed out. Soon after, the city's legal team uncovered $75,000 in missing HOA funds tied to a bogus security company she'd contracted. Her defamation suit against Emily collapsed after chat transcripts were leaked, revealing her mocking Emily and scheming behind the scenes. The judge, clearly skeptical, warned her about making baseless allegations. Her attorney, a second-rate local fixture with a penchant for TV ads, asked for a recess in a cold sweat. The case was dismissed. Margaret's public unraveling was hard to miss. At a neighborhood barbecue, she arrived with a megaphone, ranting about surveillance drones and police conspiracies. A marshal had to escort her away as children cried, and bewildered parents looked on. She became an online joke. Her meltdowns were shared in meme form, dubbed Margaret's greatest hits. Emily, always cautious, began archiving everything. Anonymous threats, harassing emails, one even signed by Margaret's former ally and ex-HOA treasurer. She sought and received a restraining order. Rather than hide, Emily channeled the chaos into education. She began training officers on how to handle false reports and HOA-related overreach. Her experience became a talking point at town halls and civic events, an example of what persistence and evidence could accomplish. Eventually, Margaret's home was foreclosed on after she defaulted on loans taken against HOA reserves. When investigators opened her storage unit, they found something disturbing: boxes of HOA property, surveillance drones, and a spreadsheet labeling local children as emerging threats for things like skateboarding. Federal authorities stepped in, launching a full investigation. Charges mounted: fraud, illegal surveillance, embezzlement. In a last, desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative, Margaret gave an unhinged podcast interview claiming she was a whistleblower exposing a conspiracy led by Emily. But the unedited version, leaked by one of Emily's former students, showed Margaret confessing to filing false reports. Faced with possible prison time, she agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testimony on other HOAs she'd influenced. Her civic life was over. Her assets were liquidated, including a dented drone bearing a taped note addressed to Chief Harper. With regret, Emily donated the drone to a community tech program. The neighborhood, meanwhile, began to mend. Children scribbled chalk art along the sidewalks. Parks hosted community events again. The HOA's old office was transformed into a lending library. Emily was invited to lead the ribbon cutting, but chose instead to attend quietly as a neighbor. A teenager she'd once defended from an unjust fine handed her a card. "Thank you for proving one person really can change things." Eventually, a new transparency law was passed, unofficially named after Emily. During a block party marking the one-year anniversary of the scandal, families danced, kids ran barefoot, and old friends reconnected. Emily stood at the edge of the festivities, looking up at the stars. The turmoil had passed. She hadn't wanted recognition, just fairness. Watching her neighbors laugh and share a peaceful night, she thought, it wasn't about beating her. It was about winning each other back.